Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Julia Baird.
And it's very nice to have you back with us for another show, Julia.
So good to be back.
I will point out, contrary to the concerned comments on the website, Chaz is doing fine. He's had a bit of a fever, a bit of a cold, but he will be back soon. Yes. And there is plenty for us to chat about tonight as well. Polls, scandals, sexism as well.
All the fun stuff.
Exactly.
A couple of great guests too. Former Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock will tell us why she's backing Kamala Harris, and Dr Larry Sabato will give us his take on the state of the US presidential race.
All of that and more is coming up. But first, there has been a lot of discussion about when Kamala Harris would finally sit down for her first interview since becoming the Democratic presidential nominee 5 weeks ago. And there's been a lot of criticism from sections of the media that she was just leaving it too long. The Trump campaign has also been accusing her of trying to get out of the scheduled debate with Trump on September the 10th, after the Harris campaign asked for a revision of the rules that had been agreed to earlier with Joe Biden, including whether they would be sitting or standing, whether they'd have notes or not, or whether the mics would be muted when it's the other candidate's turn to talk. Here's the Trump campaign's Jason Miller on Fox this week.
Well, I think Kamala Harris is looking for an off-ramp. I think they're several days into their debate prep and they realize that they're in trouble. Keep in mind, the last time someone got in the political ring with President Trump, it ended their career. Joe Biden went from a sitting president to basically an afterthought. And so I think the Harris camp is really starting to freak out here. But also there's another issue. It's been now 36 days since Kamala Harris has done an interview or a press conference or anything of the sort. I think she's peaked. I think President Trump has all the momentum after RFK Jr. came on board. So I think the Harris camp is really freaked out.
That's not what the polls are saying. We'll get to them shortly. In reality, of course, as well, the debate over the debate was largely between Trump's campaign and Trump himself. Kamala Harris didn't want the mute button because she didn't want to conceal Trump's hectoring and outbursts throughout the debate. Trump also said this week that he was happy not to have a mute button, but his campaign pretty much knew that that was a risk, and so they said, no, we want to stick to the old rules we agreed with Biden on and have a mute button. Well, all that was going on. Earlier today, Kamala Harris did finally sit down for her first interview alongside her running mate Tim Walz. They were talking to CNN's Dana Bash, who did press Harris on a number of her policy changes since her 2019 presidential campaign, when Harris opposed fracking for gas. She supported the Green New Deal, which was all the go back then, and she even said that she wanted to decriminalise border crosses on immigration. And in this interview today, she very quickly revealed a kind of go-to stock phrase about how she says, well, look, my policies have changed, but my values have not. Take a look.
Let's be clear. My values have not changed. That value has not changed. My value around what we need to do to secure our border, that value has not changed. My values have not changed. So that is the reality of it.
My takeaway from that is that her values haven't changed.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Message received. She also had an effective non-answer when she was asked about Trump's questioning of her race recently.
But what I want to ask you about is what he said last month. He suggested that you happened to turn black recently for political purposes, questioning a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
Any
same old tired playbook. Next question, please.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Yep, moving right along, John. Yeah. Look, she took a similar line when asked about a widely shared photograph of her grandniece watching her speak at the convention and what it meant to her to be a black woman running for president.
I'm running because I believe that I am the best person to do this job at this moment, for all Americans, regardless of race and gender. But I did see that photograph, and I was deeply touched by it. And
she is steering well away from that, John. She did at the convention as well. People around her talking about it, a lot of the hype and excitement around that, but she herself is repeatedly and very clearly shying from any trumpeting of I could be the first black woman to be president.
Why do you think that is? Because clearly back in 2016, Hillary Clinton, she lent into it and she was aware of the historic nature of her candidacy, and a lot of particularly American women were inspired by that. But in the end, it didn't win her an election. It didn't overcome the other issues that she faced and were facing her party at that time. Is this a good call from Harris, do you think?
Although there were millions of cracks, tiny cracks in that glass ceiling,
sure,
if I recall. And Obama steered away from talking about race during his candidacy as well in 2008.
Except when he had to, when the Reverend Wright stuff came up and he had to address blackness and black anger and all that kind of thing. But you're right, yeah, he tried to be post-racial.
When his hand was forced as well. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very delicate thing to do because she'll be accused of, I'm not using that kind of ugly term of the gender card, or she wants this because she's a woman, and she has to repeatedly say or imply that, sure, those things are important, but she doesn't have to explain herself on the grounds of being a woman. We can watch her as an effective candidate. We need to assess her according to her character and her ability. And her ability to do foreign policy, her ability to be tough on borders. The other thing is, I mean, Hillary Clinton really struggled with having to be likeable. And that has been a massive burden for women, and it continues to be. Any woman in a high-profile position is asked, are you likeable, in a way that men very, very rarely are. And that becomes a distraction, and it also takes the whole contest over somewhere else where women rarely win. So she's trying to drag it away from likeability and look at my competence, look at my effectiveness. I think that's what she's doing.
With all of the kind of the build-up to this interview, it's not an unusual thing. It's not like a debate where there's weeks and weeks of anticipation leading up to something and everyone's glued to it. But this first interview, 9 p.m. prime time on CNN, I'm sure the ratings are going to be massive for them. It did have that sense of anticipation simply because she'd been putting it off for the last month.
Right.
I mean, so the build-up was probably disproportionate. The expectations were kind of mixed because Democrats were like, well, maybe there is something wrong with her. Maybe it's going to be like Joe Biden all over again in an interview. I hope she doesn't, choke.
Well, she has shown that she's not strong in being interviewed in the past.
Lester Holt was a bad interview a couple of years ago with her.
Yeah, asked why she hasn't visited the border, and like she'll try to pass something off with a laugh. And we're seeing those memes and clips circulate with great velocity from the Republican side right now. So I think I'm watching the response to it, and the immediate response from the Democrat side was like, OK, well, at least she's done it. There was no fireworks. That was, to be honest, a little bit boring. There was nothing new in it. There was nothing dramatic in it. But she got through it. Maybe Walz seemed a little bit more comfortable in that scenario than she did. Yeah,
it struck me that you can tell that Tim Walz he's a teacher, so he's just used to talking hours and hours on end, whether people are listening to him or not.
She's a prosecutor, though,
Well, I think her prosecutorial background, her legal background probably has her often concerned about searching for the right words or not saying something that is untrue, because she, in the back of her mind, her legal training is saying, that could be contempt of court if you say that. She hasn't been freed by the Trump era of politics, which is say whatever you like and then just deny that you ever said it.
Say something else the next day.
There are no consequences at all. So it seems as though she does have that, whether it's a lack of confidence, there's something there about interviews, which ultimately, as with a lot of things in life, you can only overcome it by doing a bunch of them. And this is part of her debate practice now, because she has already been in debate prep. And essentially debates these days, they're not, well, they never were debates. Maybe, Lincoln Douglas was a debate, but
we can see,
these are consecutive interviews, basically. You'll have, journalists asking questions of Trump, questions of Harris, and then what do you think about each other in between? But it's essentially, concurrent interviews. Do you think that this is going to allay concerns? Is this going to be enough for the media, or are they going to keep going, OK, you spoke to CNN, what about us?
Yeah, I think there'll definitely be more pressure on her to be more available now. But I think we can see the way that she's going to be framing things from this very point. As we've said, like pointing to any policies in the past, well, sure, they've changed, but her values have not. I think that is going to be repeated. She mentioned things that she and Joe Biden had done together. And she adhered to his record, but at the same time was like, but now we're going to move forward. That refrain of we're moving forward from here. And she didn't want to be taken into Trump's insults towards her. Next question, moving along. I think all those things are quite significant. Yeah,
it's a difficult balance that a lot of vice presidents have, frankly, historically failed to achieve. Al Gore in 2000 wanted to take credit for the things he had done as a part of the Clinton administration. Famously, he invented the internet, and he got a lot of grief over that. And yet he was also constantly sort of having to explain Clinton's infidelities and the kind of the way that he had sort of lowered the esteem of the office. Richard Nixon, running to succeed Eisenhower in 1960. Similarly, how do you say I'm my own man or woman if I have been the understudy that didn't really have that much power? Because as Vice President, you don't get to do much. Constitutionally, there's nothing for you to do except break a tie in the Senate. So how do you claim some credit and yet say, but I'm going to be different without it being an implied criticism? It's not easy.
No, and we actually haven't got that yet. We did have her talk about getting the phone call from him when she's at home with her family staying over, making breakfast.
My family was staying with us, and including my baby nieces. And we had just had pancakes and, Auntie, can I have more bacon? Yes, I'll make you more bacon. And then we were sitting down to do a puzzle. And the phone rang, and it was Joe Biden. And he told me what he had decided to do. And I asked him, are you sure? And he said yes.
So it was interesting, wasn't it, after creating this cosy domestic scene, she stresses that her first thought was not her, but Joe Biden. Yeah,
and a lot of people certainly Conservatives on social media have scoffed at that idea, as if you wouldn't be immediately thinking, I'm going to be president one day. But I guess it's her saying, I'm not an overly ambitious person. Don't try and make me into a Hillary Clinton kind of Lady Macbeth character in all this.
I can hold those thoughts simultaneously. Like, of course I would have realised now's my turn, but I was concerned for him.
Right.
And it been a difficult time for him. I mean, they were obviously close, given he endorsed her.
Yeah, there was an immediate reaction on Twitter from Conservatives saying, yeah, right. Of course your first thought was of Joe Biden. How you doing, Joe? You're giving up the presidency. I'm going to be president. I'm going to be president.
As you flip the pancakes, fry the bacon.
Right.
Yeah.
But does she come across as credible and believable in those moments? Because she said, to be perfectly honest, she said it a few times, highlighted that she was being honest. I mean, is that something an honest person even says?
Yeah. I mean, how could this not be on her mind when actually there was global baying for him to move on? So it's a little bit disingenuous, but I think at the same time she can probably hold mixed emotions.
Yeah.
Okay, could be my turn, and wow, the massive thing for Joe Biden to have done, and also great, he'll endorse me.
Yeah. In a half-hour interview, Tim Walz was sitting there the whole time.
Yeah.
On a very superficial level, if you have a look at some of the footage there, you'll notice how much taller Tim Walz looks. I mean, obviously there's a bit of perspective there because he's in the foreground of the shot, but Tim Walz is a good 10 inches in old money taller than Kamala Harris is. And this gives us a bit of a clue as to why the Harris campaign was talking about maybe doing a sit-down debate with Trump rather than a stand-up, because Trump is tall.
And Trump uses his body.
Right.
Like, he knows how to loom over people, even if they're sit separately.
Yeah,
like,
Trump is 6'3".
Yeah.
And Harris is 5'4".
Right.
So there's a big difference there. And it was interesting to see that in this. But the other thing I want to ask you about Walz is he was largely sitting there as a kind of a bit of just a supportive presence almost. But he was asked some direct questions about some of his previous misstatements about when, before his gubernatorial election in 2018, he talked about how he had carried weapons of war in a war. And people pointed out, well, you did 24 years in the National Guard, but you weren't in combat. You did your Afghanistan service in Italy, where the bullets weren't flying. Did he answer that, plus the fact that he often talks about he and his wife Gwen going through IVF, where it was fertility assistance, but it wasn't technically IVF, but he has often talked about it being IVF. Did he explain those inconsistencies to your satisfaction? I
think it's good he was asked on them, because the Republicans are making a great deal of it and talking about trying to create a sense that he can't be trusted. Now, when it comes to him carrying a weapon of war in a war, I mean, it was during a war. So he was saying, I got my grammar wrong, and I was just trying to make the point that, I've seen what weapons can be used for in my military training, and I've been in schools, and the two of them really shouldn't work together. But so, look, he just stepped away from it and kind of said, I'm like Americans, I speak the same way as them. So that's what he's trying to use to not dissemble, but to deflect criticism.
It did feel very much like a politician saying, I am an ordinary person who misspeaks, rather than actually being an ordinary person admitting they misspoke.
Yeah.
If you get the difference.
Yeah.
You know, it did make Tim Walz look to me a lot more like a politician in that moment.
I think that's right, but where I think he did do well was talking about IVF. It's true that he should have spoken more broadly around fertility assisted treatments, but he quite quickly said, well, I'm not really sure that's what a lot of Americans are worried about. I think more people are worried about what will happen if, with Trump's agenda and reproductive rights, if were he to be elected.
Yeah, we're going to circle back to that issue a little bit later in the program, but let's have a look at some of these polls, because whether it is going to be ultimately put down to a kind of a sugar hit from Harris becoming the nominee, or a post-convention bounce, or maybe a fundamental sort of reordering of this presidential race, a number of polls this week have showed a significant shift in favour of Vice President Harris over Donald Trump. When Joe Biden was the nominee still, Democrats had basically all but given up on their hopes of holding on to the so-called Sunbelt states of the South and the West, states like Georgia and Nevada and Arizona, much less snatching back North Carolina, which Democrats have often kind of wanted to make a play for and win, but they've only done it once since the 1990s. That was Barack Obama in 2008. Well, this week there were a series of polls from Fox News in the swing states, and they had Harris closing to within 1 point of Trump in North Carolina. Harris was leading by 2 points in Georgia, 1 point in Arizona, and 2 points in Nevada. We should say that is all within those various polls' margins of error, but she was in front. And it is also very close to the final result in 2020 as well. But if you go back just to mid-July, before Biden dropped out, he was trailing in all of those states by 6 or 7 points. Meanwhile, this week, the average of national polls, not much moved. Harris leading currently by almost 3.5 points. That is around about the popular vote lead that any Democrat will need to win in the Electoral College, by the way, because of the way they run up the score in California and New York. And as for what the impact of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. dropping out last week is going to have, he had 5% of voters in those most recent polls. And some polls have suggested in the crosstabs that maybe sort of 2-1 they're going to Trump over Harris. Some are staying at home. Whichever way you cut it this week, this contest is still very much a toss-up. It is looking a lot more like the 2020 election than it had been, but not yet quite like the 2008 Obama sweep. Although Harris's progress in the Sun Belt, including gaining ground in places like Florida, within 5 points in a poll this week, is certainly giving Democrats a lot of hope, if not confidence, right now. And it's no coincidence as well that Harris and Walz were in Georgia this week. They were on a bus tour of rural counties of Georgia. That's where they did the interview with Dana Bash. If they can find 5 or maybe 10,000 Democratic voters in those deep red Republican parts of Georgia, rather than the usual go-to for Democrats, which is to say, let's just find some more votes in the suburbs or the cities, that could make a huge difference in November. And that's where Tim Walz, Julia, could become a really brilliant choice of running mate for Harris. He doesn't necessarily win one state, but he wins 10,000 votes in each of the rural counties of those states that matter. That's if it all works out. If it doesn't work out, it's like, should have picked Shapiro.
Right, but that was the counter-argument to Shapiro. It was along with the sense that Shapiro might have jostled a bit with Kamala Harris, I think, and with Tim Walz is very much the coach. He's rooting for her, he's backing her, and I think that seems to be, from what I'm hearing from some reporting, something that she warmed to, as you would, I think, if you were in that position.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get some more analysis for you now from Dr Larry Sabato. He is the director and founder of the Centre of Politics at the University of Virginia, one of America's best-known political analysts. Here's his take this week.
Well, the first thing is, of course, it's totally unprecedented for the actual nominee to drop out before the convention because he had the nomination. He could have done it. The second thing you have to know is Joe Biden was headed for probably a landslide defeat, not in the popular vote, but in the only thing that matters in America, the Electoral College. So this was looking to be a disaster for Democrats. Kamala Harris has rescued Democrats, and Biden did too by dropping out. But it's restored the energy of the party. You could almost feel it in and around the Democratic convention. You could cut the relief with a knife. And because of that, it's now a tied race, essentially. It would be better than tied for Kamala Harris if we elected a president by popular vote. But of course, we're the only major democracy that doesn't really acknowledge that people should have their votes counted. So we do it state by state, and the 7 states out of 50 that are going to determine the next president are all tied up. They're all tied. They're within a 0.23 of one another. That is Trump and Kamala Harris in every one of those states.
Wonder, Larry, what do you think the likely impact on not just the polls now, but the election in November might be from Robert Kennedy Jr. ending his independent presidential bid, endorsing Donald Trump this week? Is it going to have a major impact, do you think?
Almost none, and that surprises people. If he had done this earlier in the campaign, when he was in the upper teens, even low 20s in the polls, I'm sure it would have had a major effect on the campaign, but he didn't do it then. He is in the polling average at 5%, and the truth is he's below that. I've seen a private poll that matches the One Network poll that we've had that had him at 2%, 2. He doesn't have support to transfer to Trump. Also, we've gotten to know him, and to know him is to realize how odd and weird he is. He just doesn't have the support that Trump needs, and I think Trump is going to recognize, maybe he already has, that having RFK Jr. around is nothing but trouble.
Earlier in the year, of course, Larry, with Kennedy, West, Stein, Chase Oliver as well, the third-party candidates between them were getting close to 20% of the vote in a Biden v. Trump matchup. Now that Kennedy is gone and he was getting the most of all of them, does that really mean that third-party candidates will not be a factor this November?
I think that's the way it is, but I always remember 2000, the Bush-Gore race, which was decided by 537 votes in one state, Florida. So when you have this electoral college system, you never know how it's going to end up. But likely it is going to be Harris versus Trump, and the winner will get, a 1, 2, 3 point lead in the popular vote, which will lead to an electoral college majority one way or the other.
Larry Sabato, this week, of course, former President Trump has cast more doubt on whether the September 10th presidential debate with Kamala Harris will happen or not. He doesn't like ABC America. He doesn't like the rules of the debate, it seems. If that debate is called off, is that going to change this campaign dramatically, do you think?
Well, there's only one scheduled for president. We've already had one, but of course, the other candidate, Joe Biden, dropped out. So this might well be the one and only Harris-Trump debate. It's September 10th. It's scheduled to be on our ABC network. But what Trump is doing is typical for him. He's playing the refs. He is trying to influence the refs. And he's saying, this is so unfair. And those anchors are going to be asking questions. They're so anti-Trump. And my followers won't pay any attention to your debate if it, in fact, goes on. So I want a fair network. Well, to him, there's only one fair network, Fox, at least big enough to carry off this debate. But that's not going to happen either. There's absolutely no way Kamala Harris would agree to a Fox-led debate. So my guess is, in the end, Trump will probably agree to that ABC debate. But you see how he's already prepared his base in case he doesn't do well? And if he does do well, he'll boast, look at that. Everything was against me and I won again. So he can't lose, and that's what Trump likes to set up.
And Larry, are you seeing issues that will define this election, be it inflation and the economy or abortion or immigration, or is this more a personality-based election now, and it is down to the character and comfort that voters have with either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris?
It's likely to be about all those things you just mentioned. Now, this is a giant electorate. It's between 160 and 170 million will probably cast ballots. And when you have that many people voting within a short period of time, different voters will focus on different things. Republican voters will focus on inflation and the border. Democratic voters will focus on Trump himself as a threat to democracy, but also particularly reproductive rights. And I'm sure there'll be other issues that come into play. But the candidates' personalities and characters, that's part of the system here. And we have to consider that because we've seen what can happen when we don't consider that. Say 2016, when Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in the Electoral College, though certainly not in the popular vote.
Dr Larry Sabato, always great to get your insights. Thank you for being with us on the Fireside Chat.
Thank you, John.
Some Conservative Republicans are growing concerned that Donald Trump, who delivered them a Supreme Court that overturned the half-century precedent that protected abortion rights...
Well, I did something that nobody thought was possible. I got rid of Roe v. Wade.
...is in fact weakening the pro-life stance of the GOP in a bid to beat Kamala Harris. After all, Trump did call himself strongly pro-choice in the 1990s.
I am pro-choice in every respect.
So he has promised to veto a national abortion ban and stripped this from the Republican Party's platform for the first time in 40 years. This week, he posted that his administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights. And then, at his rally in Michigan, he promised to make insurers provide free IVF treatment. Free.
I'm announcing today in a major statement that under the Trump administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women, IVF treatment. Because we want more babies, to put it very nicely. And for this same reason, we will also allow new parents to deduct major newborn expenses from their taxes so that parents that have a beautiful baby will be able. So we're pro-family. Nobody's ever said that before.
He's also said he thinks a ban on abortion after 6 weeks is too harsh and too narrow a time frame.
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So what's crucial to know here, and this is a fact that's rarely aired, is that the number of abortions in America has increased since the Dobbs decision, jumping up by an estimated 11% between 2020 and 2023. This is despite the efforts of some states to ban or restrict the procedure, and has been attributed to better telehealth options, financial support and the shield laws in more than 22 states protecting healthcare providers who assist women. In Trump's presidency, the number of abortions in America went up by 8%, reversing a 3-decade decline. Also relevant is the rise in support for abortion, near record levels, now especially amongst younger people, 3/4 of whom say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. It's also seen in the fact that ballot measures restricting abortions have lost everywhere since the overturning of Roe v. Wade, as even in Kentucky and Kansas. Which is partly why Vice President Harris has stepped up so firmly to warn against what she thinks a Trump presidency could do to reproductive rights, including monitoring miscarriages.
He plans to create a national anti-abortion coordinator and force states to report on women's miscarriages and abortions. Simply put, they are out of their minds.
So this places Trump in somewhat of a pickle, doesn't it, John? Because he doesn't want to lose these votes to Kamala Harris, and he also doesn't want to alienate his evangelical supporters. Yeah,
I mean, it would be a deeper pickle for Trump if he sought ideological consistency. But as a populist, he is free to pretty much say whatever he wants to whoever he wants. He can tell evangelicals that he is the greatest pro-life president that America has ever had, and then he can tell women he will be terrific for reproductive rights. Now, when Trump is saying he's going to be terrific for reproductive rights, he's talking about their reproductive right to have children through IVF that he's suddenly giving away for free. If Harris or Biden or Obama had said we're going to give free IVF treatments, then Trump and Republicans will be going, socialised medicine, the government getting involved.
Yeah.
You know,
there's no costings and no details of this, by the way.
No, and the government's not going to pay for it. He's going to mandate that health insurance providers provide that as a part of their coverage, which would have to mean, therefore, the premiums are going to go up if this thing were to ever happen. It's a fascinating area, and some of those statistics over the increase in the number of abortions since the Dobbs decision in 2022, intriguing. The different reasons. You talked about telehealth. You talked about the money that has been pouring into the sector to subsidise women who need to go interstate or even to purchase so-called abortion drugs through the post to then have them sent to, which says to me a few things, Julia. One, that, I mean, obviously there was a COVID effect. There are a lot of people in 2020 and 2021 saying now's not the time to be bringing children into this world or spending a lot of time in hospitals and things because they were trying to avoid pregnancies at that time. And it also says that one of the barriers to choice as to whether to have a child or not is, do you have the money to make that choice? Abortions cost on average $500 in the United States, but you've also got all of the other fees in the medical system that it involves, the travel fees, time off work that can be difficult to get, all of that kind of thing. So the fact that there was the money that went into the sector because of the outrage at the repeal of Roe versus Wade, there's evidence that suggests that money is drying up. That outrage money is now being directed to other things, so that could also be a problem.
And a march could continue under a Trump presidency if a lot of the people around him are to be believed, who've drafted strategy, that it'll march on and continue to narrow for women. So we could see a reversing in that. But I think it's very interesting that it hasn't had the impacts that they had hoped for. And obviously the Democrats are trying to capitalise on this. And one of their ads, which I think is really effective, shows a man driving along in a car, stopped by the police, hands the police his licence, but then the police immediately starts talking to his daughter. Oh, you must be, okay, and you're 8 weeks along, are you? And they start talking to her about her intimate details, and she's like, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about it. And the policeman says, where are you going? She says to visit a friend or to go somewhere else. And he said, well, that's interesting because I can see that you're actually due to appear at some medical clinic. So playing into those fears about being, which are real fears, about being policed across state boundaries and having your miscarriages and your actual periods monitored by the state is really quite a dystopian prospect for a lot of women. Yeah, we are seeing, of course, and it happens so often, but always, it seems, in this debate, the argument happens around the extremes. And so at the Democratic Convention, we saw extraordinary, compelling speech from young Hadley, who talked about how at the age of 12 she was raped by her stepfather, she became pregnant, she had choices at that stage that she would not have now. We also hear Trump often talking about Democrats want to have no limits on abortion. They want to be able to have basically babies born and then to club them to death once they've been born. You know, so we've got these just, you know, they're not ridiculous extremes. Well, the Trump example is, because that doesn't happen. Hadley's example is a more extreme version, and one where, you know, most people would say, well, of course, she should have that choice. It's in the middle there where, you know, the debate's now over, well, is it 6 weeks? Is it 10 weeks? Is it 14 weeks? Where is that marker? And, you know, and the difference now is it the state government that should be deciding, and should that be 6 weeks in Florida and 24 weeks in New York? Right. Or should it be down to the individual and their doctor to decide what is the exact medical situation right now? And that's where you kind of think, it's just, you know, this is it shouldn't even be a part of politics. It's not part of our politics. Why is it part of their politics? I'll be really interested to see how they debate it. We have, you know, Trump with his own personal history. I mean, we had a porn star giving evidence that in his alleged affair with her, he did not use a condom. Right. We have against that the repeated questioning of Brett Kavanaugh from Kamala Harris saying, are there any laws that cover men's bodies? And he doesn't know how to answer, and he flusters. And that contrast is a really, really fascinating one, I think. It will be, particularly if and when it comes up in the debate, if it happens. Meanwhile, Fox News host Jesse Waters is in deep water this week after these comments about Vice President Harris.
We don't know who she is. We don't know what she believes. She's going to get paralyzed in the Situation Room while the generals have their way with her. Right now...
Jesse Waters. Jesse, I don't like that.
Figuratively, again.
Take it back.
Have their way with her. Control her. Not in a sexual way.
Interesting that even pro-Trump Judge Jeanine Pirro and Dana Perino scolded him. They clearly thought that was a deliberate, crude
Either way,
sexual suggestion.
Yeah.
And, you know, sexual or not, it was certainly, I mean, what he was saying was sexist.
Yeah.
Saying that
she will freeze in a room
because
where
she's
you
a
have to
woman
make
and all
big
these
decisions,
male generals are there.
and they'll be able to do whatever they want with her.
And it's also safe to say that the Trump campaign itself, as well as their media surrogates like Jesse Waters, are very happy to dabble in quite degrading and sexualised
Sometimes more
content.
than dabble, but yes.
Yeah, well, for example, this is being spread online at the moment, and this is, if there are kids watching right now, probably not appropriate for them to be watching right now. And ordinarily I wouldn't even want to show this on our program, except that it was reposted by Donald Trump on Truth Social. He didn't create it, but he resent this. It references the fact that Hillary Clinton's husband, Bill, of course, was involved in a sex scandal as president. It insinuates that Kamala Harris then used sexual favours herself to get ahead in her career. This is the image that he has been spreading, Julia.
No words, John, except also so many. And then JD Vance weighed in, likening a botched question about the map of America by Miss Carolina to Harris' ability to do an interview. So taking aim at both her sexuality and her intelligence. And there's a lot worse out there on conservative social media. Yeah,
there certainly is. But the fact that we've got the presidential candidate and a former president and his vice presidential running mate doing this has you wonder, well, are they deliberately trying to trigger women or people that are going to be sensitive to this kind of stuff? Is there a trap being laid here, or is this just them both showing who they are and ignorant of the fact that they've got a real electoral deficit with female voters that could cost them this election very, very easily? And they just can't help themselves. I'm at a loss to know why on earth they would do this.
Well, there could be the case that people might be genuinely sexist. There could be that this is something to weaponise against any woman who's running for political office. And sometimes that can be effective. They're taking aim not just at her sexuality, but, and I want to explain that in a moment, but also at her intelligence. The number of times that Trump is saying she's just not smart. She's not smart. I mean, the woman who's a prosecutor and has been a state attorney general is just not smart. So it's a time-honoured ploy to dismiss and deride, and especially to sexualise someone. And I bet you we see a lot more of that. Yeah, so there has been this narrative around Kamala Harris being a diversity hire, an affirmative action hire. But there is also very specific references to how, as a part of that narrative, she used her sexuality to get ahead. And this has been quite pervasive in recent weeks. Right, so a lot of this comes from the fact that Kamala Harris had a relationship with the former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown. He was the Speaker of the California State Assembly and she was a prosecutor at the time. This was the 1990s. So he appointed her to a couple of boards, positions she was qualified for. But pundits like Megyn Kelly of Fox News have suggested that this decades-old liaison damages her credibility today.
There's a debate on this on Twitter right now about whether her sleeping with Willie Brown when she was an up-and-coming, inspiring politician in San Francisco is fair game. It's part of a pattern of her ascending to positions that she does not deserve based on merit for other reasons. But Harris's supporters point to the fact that she subsequently won 2 elections, District Attorney of San Francisco and Attorney General of California, let alone become Vice President. And yet, John, here we are, a Republican nominee tweeting blowjob jokes about his female opponent.
Yeah. And Megyn Kelly, who Donald Trump famously insinuated that she must have been having her period when she asked aggressive questions in a Fox News debate in 2015, and who has been herself the target of sexualised attacks. That she's kind of piling in on all of this doesn't make her a particularly great ally either, I would suppose. Yeah, and the whole thing about, like, she was, I don't know, she was crazy at that when he was saying that about Megyn Kelly. She was bleeding out of her wherever. And again, you've got, like, some kind of plausible deniability there, right? Oh, maybe her toe. Yeah. Where women often bleed out of, I don't know. Same thing with, paralysed and the generals were having their way with her. That's the way it works. It's just the constant innuendo and smearing. And the women around him immediately picked up
on what that sounded like.
Right, and these aren't easily triggered liberals. These are very, very conservative women who are against all of that woke kind of stuff, probably wouldn't even call themselves a feminist.
Yeah, and I think it's just ultimately about undermining her authority and her capacity. Yeah.
Now, our next guest on the Fireside Chat is former Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, who has been one of the most consistent conservatives to criticise Donald Trump from before his first election win in 2016, right through to now supporting his rival Kamala Harris for the presidency this year. At a time when many of her fellow Republicans kept their concerns about Trump's temperament and fitness for office private, possibly for the sake of their own careers, Barbara Comstock was one of the very few members of Congress on the Republican side to make her views public. So when we sat down this week, I wanted to know what she thinks of those fellow Republicans who once criticised Trump, including the likes of Marco Rubio and Nikki Haley, who have now fallen very much back in line. But I began by asking her about her calls in October of 2016 for Trump to drop out of the presidential campaign against Hillary Clinton after that infamous Access Hollywood tape surfaced. Take a look. Why did that Access Hollywood tape have you turn so sharply against the Republican presidential nominee then?
Well, I was on the ballot that year, so that I was already in Congress. I had won what was a swing district. I was one of the only Republicans inside the Beltway. I live in Virginia, and I had not yet said I was going to vote for Trump. I had supported Marco Rubio that year. And when that tape came out, it was actually the night of my son's rehearsal dinner. And so I hadn't heard it yet. And when I came out and listened to that, it just was an instantaneous, this is disqualifying. Somebody, that kind of misogyny, talking, sexual assault is not funny. I've had friends who've been sexually assaulted. I had a young woman's program that I did about women's leadership, and I just instantaneously, fired out a statement, went back to my son's wedding celebrations, and I actually assumed more people would do the same. Actually, quite a few women did. I believe, John McCain did, others did. And, unfortunately, that didn't happen. He didn't step aside. But, I assumed at that point that he would lose. Probably figured I would too. It was not a fun 3 weeks for the next 3 weeks until the election. But then you had that, fluke of an election. But then, things only continued to kind of get worse with his misogyny. But I think that has stood the test of time in terms of his misogyny, but also you've seen, racism.
How, once you're elected to Congress, re-elected to Congress, and Donald Trump is suddenly President of the United States, as a Republican, you've got a responsibility to your constituents to work with whoever's in the White House, particularly if they're of your party. How did you find, particularly after you said this guy should be dumped, how did you find working with the Trump White House?
Listen, I had been in the State House. I had also been in Congress with Barack Obama. You work with, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, you have to work to represent your constituents. I also was, a pretty conservative Republican. So I worked on the issues that I cared about. Republicans wanted to pass tax reform. We wanted to do infrastructure. That's something that Donald Trump never passed. President Biden did. So we went about passing the bills that we wanted to pass. Unfortunately, a lot of the things didn't pass because Donald Trump was listening to the far-right Freedom Caucus. Those were his far-right supporters who basically always wanted to shut down the government and not get things done.
I can understand that approach. You have a responsibility to do that. I can understand as well how somebody like Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz, who suffered at the hands of Trump during that bruising primary of 2015-16 as well, would accommodate the reality that he is now president. We've got to get stuff done. What do you make, though, of somebody like Marco Rubio and kind of going, well, the fact that he was on the shortest of shortlists to become Trump's running mate this year, after everything that happened then and everything that he has seen since? Does that change how you feel about Marco Rubio?
Well, listen, I think after January 6th, Trump was disqualified to ever run again. I mean, while I was still in office, I would call him out on his racist, when we had the Charlottesville riots, which were anti-Semitic, racist riots in my home state of Virginia. I called him out on that. There were so many things he said and did, attacking women, attacking minorities. So many of the things that he did were just, said often were bad. But then we would go back to work and pass bills. we'd keep the government open, we would do things, you know, pass a larger military budget that we thought was important. Paul Ryan was Speaker at that time. Mitch McConnell was the leader. These guys would, you know, muscle through, and those of us who were in the governing wing of the Republican Party would still try and get things done.
To circle back to Marco Rubio, I mean, was this just a cynical calculation on his part to say, well, Trump's vice president's got a pretty good chance of becoming president someday, either through the invocation of the 25th Amendment or, you know, something else. Either way, I mean, was that just basically a career decision? And that the Republicans who come out against Trump are the ones who've said, you know what, my career is less important than criticising this guy. It's really more about kind of a pragmatic personal ambition that has them kind of going along with it.
Yeah, well, it is sad to see that. And I think in many ways that's probably why Donald Trump chose JD Vance instead of somebody like that, because he probably, in fact, you know, there were reports that Tucker Carlson, I think he was down here, right, in Australia, trying to, you know, rev up his particular, I'm not a fan of Tucker, but Tucker Carlson reportedly told him, you know, you better pick JD Vance because JD Vance is so disliked, like you, that they would never invoke the 25th Amendment. You know, if you pick somebody like Marco Rubio or Governor Burgum, then they might invoke the 25th Amendment to get rid of you.
Not want a good understanding.
But if you pick a mini-me like JD Vance, who Republicans dislike as much as they dislike you, then you won't have to worry about something like that. So I think that was part of that. But unfortunately now, what you've seen is JD Vance is very much disliked, but they're not doing well with women, with just a lot of people out there who want to feel the joy and want to feel the turning of the page. And I think Nikki Haley, who was also attacked by Donald Trump, called a bird brain. Women don't really appreciate having their talent being attacked like that. And Nikki Haley, I was a Nikki Haley supporter, but their talent being demeaned like that by somebody who, you know, we've never seen Donald Trump's grades, but we're told by his family that they weren't very good. But I think that kind of constant demeaning and misogyny by Donald Trump and now by his mini-me, JD Vance, is not selling well.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Given that Nikki Haley did openly challenge and seriously challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination and said that he was unfit to be president and unhinged. You think she's correct. She now thinks that he should be the next president of the United States. How do you feel about that? Because you're amongst the group who have taken this stand and said, country over party, this man is unfit. I'm not going to fall in line. When you see somebody you have also supported, like Nikki Haley, falling into line, why is she doing that?
Well, I was sorry to see her do that. I mean, actually, Donald Trump had said, if you vote for Nikki Haley, you are permanently barred. We don't want you. So I have my permanently barred T-shirt. I took that to heart. And, you know, I think when someone's called a bird brain, I would prefer they not, you know, do that. You know, I think, you know, she has her reasons. I won't do that. You know, I think she, you know, made her decision. She gave her speech at the convention. But people were still, I can tell you, I had Trump people still attacking her, to me personally, after she had endorsed Trump. So this is the way MAGA works. You know, once you've criticized, you know, they aren't about embracing and welcoming people in. Whereas on the other side, you look how Kamala Harris has now welcomed and welcomed people, welcomed Republicans, and said, you don't have to change your party. But we understand, you know, the people, you know, it's more important to stand with somebody who you know is a good person and decent, who is, you know, believes in democracy. And we're going to vote for a good and decent person rather than a felon who only stands for themselves.
There does seem to be, at least in the polls, some evidence of potential ticket splitting. Larry Hogan doing much better as a Senate candidate in Maryland.
And a big fan. He was my neighbor in Maryland, and I am supporting him. And certainly I would love to see him
So he could be the key to a Senate majority, a 51st Senate seat, depending on how things play out elsewhere. Do you think that is also an attractive message for Republicans considering supporting Harris, that a moderate Republican majority in the Senate with deal makers like Murkowski and Collins and Hogan may prove to be an effective centrist form of government for America for the next 4 years?
Yes, very much. And I think also, one of the things, while you saw somebody like the four-star general who came out today, that story that we have heard from Trump's chief of staff, John Kelly, about calling our military heroes suckers and losers, that is something that Trump keeps going back to and denying. But for those of us who know John Kelly, and I know him, he was a constituent, I've spoken with John Kelly, and I know John Kelly to be an honorable man, and I believe him, and so do many Republicans, and I think that's why you'll see more military people,
Do you think John Kelly will come out and confirm that story again? He did.
Well, he has
write
confirmed
to CNN, confirming it after it first.
No, he's spoken to press, and he has confirmed that to numerous press. I don't know if he'll come out again, but I believe him, and many Republicans know and believe him, and that is I believe that to be a true story, and that is something. He has dishonored our military, and just recently he made statements that again were called out, because when he was saying that the Medal of Honor, the Congressional Medal of Honor that's given to fallen heroes, that's not as good as the presidential medal that he was giving to a woman who was a donor of his. And of course that was a disgraceful thing to say, because that's, the Congressional Medal of Honor that's given to fallen heroes is something that we all understand is, a very high level. But and recently he was speaking about, he was trashing our military. He's done that time and time again. And he was saying, we got to get these military out of here. He attacks them. Maybe Donald Trump might want to, show us his bone spurs. He's never done that. But, these are the kind of things that cause people, I know people who were his appointees at the Defense Department who didn't vote for him in 2020 because they saw how he treated the military, they saw how he talked about the military, and those are just unacceptable kinds of things.
Well, thank you for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for another Fireside Chat. But do join us for Planet America next Wednesday night, 9:30 p.m. on ABC TV, and anytime you like from 9 on iView, YouTube and Facebook.
There'll be another Fireside Chat next week, and if you like a chat, you can catch my new podcast with Jeremy Fernandez, Not Stupid, on ABC Listen and all the usual pod places.
Bye-bye.
Bye.